Greetings and welcome to Mount Olympus. I am Hercules Invictus, and tonight on the creative process, I'm proud to bring you Nick Curto and Brian Walker. This should be quite a conversation, and I'll be here in case you need me listening.
Thank you so much, Hercules. You are the best producer I've ever had. For that is earned. That is absolutely earned. So you need to hear that along with our listeners. So thank you so much. This is I'm from the Disclosure Network, New York, now celebrating our 27th year of producing two meetings a month dealing with the deep research of ETs, of UFOs, of paranormal phenomenon. And I'm telling you, it has been an amazing ride for me. Absolutely amazing. I knew it would be, and it has multiplied that by 1,000. I'm not kidding. 27 years, some of the most interesting people with some of the most amazing encounters, both physically and mentally and also emotionally. We'll get into that at some point. But my guest tonight, I am so really excited because Brian, you are an amazing guy. Brian Walker is an expert on iconic sci-fi movies, and this is a subject that I absolutely love. Brian, welcome.
Well, thank you to Nick. How are you doing tonight?
Never better, never better. We have a brand new, my mother used to say, we have a brand new year to mess up.
Well, I'm well on my way to it at this point.
Her Irish humor was always there, and that was, I remember her saying that. So anyhow, yeah, the drive-in concept, I love that. I was a part of that drive-in culture when
Oh,
it
me
was
too.
going on, when I was in Springfield, Massachusetts, borrowing my dad's car and going to drive-ins. And I'll never forget it. Really, it was quite an experience, and it's a very fond memory that I have for sure. I'm sure that you've been in many drive-ins. Tell us about your
Right.
drive-in experience.
Well, my driving experience has started very early. I had I'm about 60. Well, I'm almost 60 years old, and I was born in the 1960s. And I had young parents who loved to watch movies. And back in the day, you only had three, four, five channels, depending on where you lived, if you were that lucky on television. And television, oh boy, the picture wasn't very good, and it was probably black and white because most people didn't have color back then. um, and a lot we went to the movies a lot as a kid, and it was when I was a small child. We obviously went to the drive-in because you didn't have to dress the child up. I went in my pajamas like a lot of other kids. And I was fully expected to go to sleep while my parents watched whatever adult content. I mean, not adult movies, but that sounded bad. Whatever more adult content movies that were on, and this was the '60s, so probably couldn't have watched that at a drive-in anyway. Um, but I can remember fighting sleep and staying up, and I got to see dirty stuff like Dirty Harry. I watched Straw Dogs when I was about 6 years old, which is that really violent Sam Peckinpah film with a violent rape scene. I'm way too young to have seen something like that. Uh, but it was like I said, I had very permissive parents. That apparently. That was definitely a part of my experience, and I loved being able to jump out of the back seat of the car and run. You ran all the way to the front of the screen was, and that's where the children's playgrounds usually were at drive-in theaters, and you spend all your time there until it was time for the program to start, and then you ran back to the car as soon as the cartoon began. That's another thing too. You often have one or two cartoons, and lots of ads when you went to the drive-in.
You're just ringing some amazing bells that I very fondly remember. I remember taking the speaker and putting it in my dad's, rolling it down, putting it in there, rolling it back up carefully so it's right there. It wasn't great sound. I think you
Oh, it
would,
was terrible sound.
oh my
Yeah,
God. I mean, you could hear what they were saying, but not
Sort of.
really too much more than that, but okay, all right. And I remember my buddy said, Nick, when you're going to the drive-in with the girl you're dating, whatever you do, bring lots of blankets and towels. And I said, well, why would that be? And he said, well, there might be some intimate moments and you want to take the towels and block up the windows of the car so it's a little more private. I'm like, wow. I mean, so it was really date night for a lot of people too. It was a date night, Saturday night, Friday night to go to the wonderful. Mine was called the round round uh, the Round Hill Drive-In Theater right in Springfield, Massachusetts. Right now, it's a highway. It's a highway. It's all gone because I did check that. And I felt a little badly because I had some wonderful times there. And of course, sci-fi movies were amazing way back then. And I think that you'll agree that one of the main reasons was because they really did give you new thinking, new ways of thinking and looking at things that we took for granted, like time travel, like societies, like what would other civilizations be like? And would they be friendly? And all these wonderful concepts, it opened up the doors. And I remember also how much I liked Twilight Zone. That was one of the highlights. I'm sure you were very familiar with that TV program because it also did the same thing. It opened up doors that we never thought about, and we were dealing with some new concepts. How wonderful was that? Is that?
Well, for years, but prior to the Twilight Zone, debuting in the late 1950s, we had depended on monsters to be the source of our horror, and which worked really well. I mean, the Universal monsters are those are some of my favorite films. Quite honestly, the Mummy with Boris Karloff's in my top 10. But after everyone saw the horrors of World War II, suddenly fantastic vampires and werewolves and things like that just weren't frightening audiences anymore. And you had to go to a different location within the unknown. And the space race started around the end of World War II because of all the technology that was born out of the Second World War. Lots of technology came out of that war, and it was a horrible war, but in terms of advancing technological advances in communication. I mean, TV was, in its infancy at the time World War II started. And so much of the technology in automobiles came out of World War II as well, interestingly. And I think audiences were looking for more than just the 1930s escapism. They were looking for something that did give them a hint of what the future might be like, and different kinds of horror, different things to be afraid of, different things to worry about. And sci-fi and horror are at times almost the same. And I apologize for my cat; she's trying to evade.
I think the cat adds a lot to it. First of all, I saw the tail, and I thought, I think it's a cat, but it could be another animal. Who
Oh,
knows?
it's tail. It's cattail. Yeah.
What's the cat's name?
Her name is Tippy, named after Tippi Hedren.
Oh,
Uh,
excellent, excellent.
well, when she came to us as an older kitten, I would say she was about 6 or 7 months old, something like that, and she was under the bird feeder in my front yard, and
Ah,
birds were swooping down on her, and I after a couple of days, I sensed that she wasn't, somebody else's cat, and I live in a development, and that she had been dropped off here. Which, since we live outside of town, that unfortunately that happens sometimes. So I got her into the garage, and I was going to try to find her a home through my veterinarian by offering to pay for all of her blood test, vaccinations, spaying, and whatnot. And by the time I got her to the vet, I decided that, yeah, well, I'll just keep this one. You know?
No, no.
Uh,
By that time, it was love, it was love, it was respect, and a cat can teach you quite a bit. My partner has a huge cat. It's a kind of a blonde, uh, yellow cat, and his name is Gonzilla, Gonzilla the cat. And yes, it is exactly the right name for that particular cat. You don't want to cross that cat. You want to give the cat whatever the cat demands and orders. You say, yes, Gonzilla, absolutely, because cats, someone said to me, uh, a dog is your best friend, but with a cat, you are their servant, and they know it. You are their servant.
I wouldn't disagree with that, but they can also be your best friend,
Okay.
too. Um, my cat Barney, who passed away a couple of years ago, had some sort of sixth sense. He knew when I was going to come home, and would hop up. We have a two-story house, and there's a half wall on the second story, so you can look over the foyer, in the first floor. And he just somehow knew that I was coming home, whenever I was coming home, and would hop up on that half wall, would greet me right there. Make a fuss over him. He loved it. Kind of a ritual, that we had. So yeah, he did train me to do that. Now that I think about it.
Sounds like a good friend, a very good friend
Oh,
indeed.
he was a great cat. He was another cat that I pulled out of the yard. Interestingly.
Now, I wanted to go into, if I may, with you, especially with someone like you, tell us about the very first or the very first sci-fi movies. Who made them? Where were they made? And what were they dealing with?
Hmm. The first science fiction movie that I can remember seeing at the drive-in was Bruce Dern in Silent Running, which was a 1972 film. And at the time, I had seen other bits and pieces of science fiction. My father was and is, I should say, a huge Star Trek fan. So I saw all of the episodes from the late '60s, which immediately went into rerun. So even when I was too young to have seen that first or second season, I still saw them in advance of seeing Silent Running. So Silent Running gave me kind of a different view of science fiction, I think. I don't want to dole out too many spoilers, but Bruce Dern is more or less a space farmer. He's growing things in space, and all of that's kind of appealing because at the time we lived in a rural area in central Michigan. And potato fields here and there, and then a drive-in theater. uh, and it was interesting to see. Well, and then there's a kind of a thriller that unfolds from a movie, which I don't want to dole out any spoilers for. But it's just kind of a fun movie to ponder. Um, in that the exact same things that I was seeing going around in the farming community where I lived, I could see on screen in the future, in space. It was that shared, knowing that whether you're here or there, you can still share the same situation, some of the same emotions around them. And that movie, for me, kind of humanized science fiction a little bit. For some people, I think it does seem science fiction films and television shows can seem cold and sterile, but they don't have to be. And I think that Alien, which I saw when I was a teenager in the late 1970s at the theater, kind of taught us kind of the human element of a science fiction film can lead to a really horrific experience. And I loved that movie when it came out. It was nothing. It was nothing like anything I'd ever seen before.
It does.
and
Opened up a lot of doors, a lot of doors.
and very graphic at the same time. And we're used to, if you see modern horror films, I mean, they're extremely graphic. Some of them border on being autopsies, quite honestly. And I don't mind gore, but sometimes they get a little ahead of themselves. And earlier this year, I went to the theater to see Alien Romulus, and I think this was probably in August or early September. And I was excited to see it because I had liked, a lot of the previous Alien films, and was ultimately so disappointed in it. It was in a different setting, but they took everything that I thought was innovative about the first Alien film and recycled it. And I was very unhappy to see that. There's a scene at which a character has a face hugger, like as John Hurt did in the original. And then the stomach explodes and all that. And I'm like, oh, I already saw that in the original. Can you give me something new? I really disliked Alien Romulus. And another thing about it's a science fiction movie, very heavily, but it's more dystopian. Um, it's if Gary, Indiana were in space, it's more like that, if that makes any sense. And I kind of like I like the thought of space as being something to look forward to. New frontier, as William Shatner would have narrated in Star Trek. And I really didn't enjoy the dystopian nature, of Alien Romulus. I hated seeing that people were enslaved in space, and it would be nice to see us advance instead of regress, but who knows?
I wanted to run past you. I don't remember the name of it. You probably know it well. It was a black and white, early sci-fi, and I remember the scene where this rocket goes into the face of the moon.
Hmm.
And
A Trip to the
do you
Moon.
recall that and what the name of it was and maybe what year that was?
It was 1902, and it's called A Trip to the Moon.
Wow,
Uh,
that's right. Yes, yes.
Very famous silent film that for the time really used some cutting edge photography, and it was sort of the birth of special effects. Um, those of us who loved watching old Ray Harryhausen, produced films, I think find Trip to the Moon fascinating because you do get the rocket that goes into the eye of the moon,
Yep.
which is just somebody with a lot of clay on their face, but still,
Yes, exactly right. Exactly right. And it was
for
so funny.
audiences,
It was so amazingly funny. And it had to be one of the very first sci-fis. Were there others before that?
not to my knowledge. I think that is sort of the beginning of science fiction. Um,
It could very well be, and it would be a great example of if it had to be the first one, it's a good one to start off thing. And it was not sound, right? There was no sound in
oh
it.
no, there was no sound in films until 1927.
Okay,
Uh,
so what did they use? Did they have like something someone could play on an organ or on a piano? Did they have like a script, like a musical thing that they would send with the film?
most most films in the early 1900s did not have a score to go along with them. You only found that with the major studios like MGM, would have been S&A. Those were the bigger studios. United Artists. Um, they would have had scores in their films, but that would have also been much later than A Trip to the Moon. Those films would have been from the 1920s when a lot of when many theaters did have piano players that they would bring in to play the score that was
So it would
delivered
be
with
a
the film.
live person with a
Yes,
with a with a paper, the notes and all that, and they would be
correct.
following that, and the studio would have sent that with the silent film.
They would have,
How
but
it,
A Trip to the Moon would not have had a score.
Okay. I went to an old theater in Greenfield, Massachusetts, where a buddy of mine uh, has a home there. And he said, Nick, you got to see this old theater in Greenfield, Massachusetts. And so we went, and right in the lobby was their prized possession. It was a organ from way back when. And I had a chill. I really did from that theater. At the time it was closed. I don't know how we managed to get in, but we did. And just walking around and seeing the old organ where they used to play all the music and all that. And it was just very a wonderful experience to see that. And of course, I do remember going to Radio City Music Hall here in New York City, and at one point they had an organ there. I don't know if they do it anymore, but they had this huge sound organ playing at Radio City, I guess between the live stage show and the movie, if I recall. It's very vague, but I do believe that that's how they did it then. And that's just such an interesting part of the whole genre. And I wanted to also tell you that I saw last month a film. You could almost say it's a sci-fi movie, but it's not perhaps what we normally think of as a sci-fi movie. And the movie's title is Here, Here. Have you heard of that?
Not right offhand. No, I can't place. No, I don't think I have.
It's a movie. You got to see it. You really got to see it. I'm highly recommending it to you and to Hercules too, because I think you'd enjoy it. And the premise of this movie is there's a little piece of land. I believe it's somewhere in the Philadelphia area, I'm guessing, a little piece of land, and there's a house on it. And the premise is that piece of land has seen a lot of history, a lot of life, a lot of amazing events in that little tiny piece of land. And at one point, and this is not going to spoil it for you because it's when you see the whole thing. So they took the premise that all these amazing things happened on our planet on that little piece of land, which is true. So you see everything from dinosaurs walking around, you see volcanic explosions, you see people in the living room from the 20s and 40s dressed as they would normally dress, saying what they would say. And it's a time warp. It goes back and forth in time. What an interesting concept that film is. And Tom Hanks, because he and his wife moved there, and it's their living room now. Of course, it's been decorated as time goes on, and of course they dress appropriately as the years go by. And you see Tom Hanks as a very young man, and I believe that was all done through AI.
Hmm.
And it's an amazing experience. And then later you see him as a much older person. Probably that's when they didn't use AI; they just had Tom Hanks on set. But
Yeah,
it
the older
is
you get, the less makeup you need.
and it really kind of it makes you think quite a bit about time, the flow of time, and how things go so quickly, really quickly, and we have to really think about that, and how we change, and our ideas change, and our physical world changes quite a bit. And at one point, just one more point I'll make about the movie is that at one point on the screen, they have different squares on the screen, and each of the squares represents a time on that property. So you're seeing everything from the 30s and 40s to dinosaurs. It will, I think, will make you think. I think you would find it an interesting a couple hours. So if you can possibly see it here,
Sounds
HD,
interesting.
yeah. I was impressed with it. I really was. They went to bold worlds they haven't gone before in movies, I do believe. So now, what are your favorite? This is going to probably be a hard question because I'm sure you've got a lot of favorites because you've seen so many wonderful, iconic movies, sci-fi movies. What are some of your all-time absolute favorites and why?
Yeah, favorite movies in general?
And yeah,
Or
well, I would say let's keep it to sci-fi movies.
okay, 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah,
And that's a favorite for a couple of reasons. One of them, the photography is. I love, movies are a visual medium, so you should, what you see on the screen should be larger than life. It should be vivid. It should be bright. It should be fantastic. And that movie covers that base
yeah,
so well.
yeah.
And it's nothing like anything before it. It is beautifully shot. It looks so realistic compared to what you used to see in science fiction movies. It was acted really well. There was a budget. Uh, they spent 2 years on the production of this, and this was a big budget sci-fi movie, and that's something that was new back then. The concept of spending a lot of money on science fiction. Beforehand, science fiction had been the realm of poverty, sometimes poverty row producers, but oftentimes, even with George Powell, um, you know, budgets were limited. And with 2001: A Space Odyssey, they had deep pockets, and were able to spend the luxury of spending 2 years on a film. I mean, that's amazing. Whereas budget filmmakers had 2 weeks to shoot it, edit it, get it out,
Get it
uh,
out, get it out, get some money, get some
get it
money.
in the can.
Yep,
Get it to the theaters ASAP.
yep.
And the cast in 2001: A Space Odyssey. Well, the crew, like I said, the film's just beautifully shot. Um, and there's no getting around that for me. And I think that's the biggest thing
I
beyond
totally agree
anything else.
with your viewpoint there. To me, it stands out as such an amazing mark of a fine, probably the most iconic sci-fi movie, and I've seen a lot of them that I can remember is that movie, and I could see it another 10 times. I really could.
I can't tell you how many times I've seen the movie. And there's something else about the film. A person I used to work with, a friend of mine who's now deceased, it was his favorite movie. And at the time that he and I were working together, I was doing our website, and I was doing some event planning and graphic support for the events. I want to say about 25 years ago or so. And I ordered a 2001: A Space Odyssey poster and directly lifted pieces, from the original release poster to put in some of our graphics that we were using to promote our services at the time. It was a lot of fun, and I think of him. His name was Craig, and I think of him whenever I watch 2001: A Space Odyssey because it was his favorite film. And for me, it's oh golly, I'm not sure it's my favorite science fiction film, but it's the one that definitely has made the greatest impact.
Agreed.
Um,
Absolutely agreed on
and,
that.
and I think it was well done on so many different levels. Now, a lot of people find it inaccessible because it does drag, here and there. It's the pacing of the film that some people find irritating. I don't, but I see it. I can see where that might be an issue.
Absolutely an incredible work of art. And we're talking right now, 2025. We're talking about AI. We're talking about how it's coming into our lives and how it's changing our lives. And it certainly already has. And remember in Space Odyssey, Hal, and which would have to be an AI, and he was saying, "No, no, you can't do something like you can't do this." And Hal was taking a position of authority, and
Mhm.
that was scary. I remember thinking, "Oh my God, wow, that is really probably going to be true in some levels, but it's also quite
Yeah.
scary." Right? Did you feel that when you saw it?
I think when I first started watching this film when I first became a fan of it. It did seem that part of it seemed a little fantastic, and now it seems so prophetic.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I would never have dreamed that that would have happened in my lifetime, only to know that it's probably already happened.
It has. It absolutely has, and on many levels already. I went on the internet to a place where they would give you a free 1 minute to come up with an AI assisted film. And they said, say some or type some words. And I put disclosure, ET, UFO, the government. I believe those were the words I chose. And they said, okay, we're processing, we're processing. And in about a minute, maybe 2 minutes tops, it said, we are ready for your video. And I went, oh my God. And it came on the screen. It was color, it was edited, and all the elements that I had said in AI were there. It absolutely was there. They took stock photos of subject matters that I was, would follow, and they did a one heck of a wonderful job. And I was impressed and scared at the same time.
I
I
know.
really was. But what an experience. And on image, the images all had a copyright on the screen because it was free. But if you paid, I believe it was a little less than $400 a year, you could use this machine, this AI, and then the copyrights would disappear from all the stock footage, the stills as well as a movie footage, so that it would look like, and it would be your production. I mean,
Interesting.
that's pretty incredible. And one other thing I wanted to share with you is that, again, I founded, co-founded, and I'm the director of a Disclosure Network New York, in our 27th year. And someone called me and said, Nick, I don't know if you know this, but Al Bielek from the Philadelphia experiment is going to be in New York City. I'm like, oh my God. He said, is there a way you could try to get a hold of him and invite him to our meeting coming up this coming Sunday in the East Village? And I said, I'll do what I can. I don't remember exactly, Brian, how I managed to do it, but I did connect with him. And the meeting was Sunday at 1 o'clock. I did my welcomes to everybody in the room, and the door opens up, and Al Bielek was standing there. And I went, sir, oh my God, welcome, welcome. And of course, everybody went crazy. And I said, would you care to say some words to our group? I know they would love that. And he said, absolutely. He must have done at least 90 minutes, if not 2 hours, talking about his life. And the reason I'm bringing that up is one thing he said, Brian, that I almost fell off my chair. He said, I have been into the future for real. He said, and one of the things that was outstanding about my experience there is the fact that there's no government as we know it. There aren't any more human beings that can be bought off or whatever and made to do what, who wants to do what. They said it's done with a advanced computer that cannot possibly be altered in any way. And on that computer, they programmed all the laws, all the court cases, everything that would be considered lawful, and that it makes decisions for the people of the planet. I mean, if that doesn't blow your mind, I don't know what would. And he was saying, I was there at the time, and that was running the show. That's what they trusted. Anyhow, I just thought that was an amazing a moment in our group to have Al Bielek be there and say that. There's a lot more to it than that, but basically, I just wanted to share that with you. Um, Also, I want to tell you that Gene Roddenberry and his wife, who lived in California, were avid readers of a book that I've been reading now for 35 years, called the Urantia book. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. Urantia, the Urantia book. The word Urantia means our planet, Earth. And to make a long story short, it's a 2,000-page book. It is an incredible book. It talks about us as human beings, about God, about who Jesus was, about what happens when we pass on, about what they call our universal career. It goes into amazing areas of the Urantia book. And this is why I'm bringing it up. Gene Roddenberry and his wife and some of the writers had gone to the meetings of the Urantia book because they have study groups all over the world. I go to one. In fact, I ran one for a while. And a lot of the episodes are reflective of what the Urantia book is saying. And I'm going to send you a copy of something we've got, which is talking about the scenes in the TV show, and then what the Urantia book actually says on some of the pages. And it's extraordinary. I was blown away at some of the parallels that go on. How wild is that? Tell us more about, besides the one you mentioned, what other movies have moved you, either emotionally or opened up windows that you didn't really think about before you saw those movies? What made a dent in your personal life, in your knowledge that you can remember, that you can associate with sci-fi movies?
Oh boy, that's a really interesting thought. I'm going to have to go back to Alien.
Okay.
Seeing that, it did something to me. Not really sure what, but until then, I guess I had never married science fiction and horror before, and I'm a huge horror film fan. But until Alien, I had never really paired the two together so well as Ridley Scott's movie does. Um, and before that, I had always looked at science fiction as something to view, something to see, something to spectacular, something bigger, larger than life. So 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is kind of hard to, it's a tough act to follow, in terms of visuals, especially. But Alien gives you all that and even more. Uh, and that movie really turned my head. Now, I before that I had seen the original Star Wars, and I was probably 11 or 12 years old when the original Star Wars came out. I went to see it with my father, and I was kind of disappointed. I got to tell you, it it didn't it didn't deliver on what I thought it should have been, and I went in with high expectations, which is always a bad idea. You should, if you go in with lower expectations, usually those will be met, and if exceeded, great. But I went in with really high expectations on Star Wars, and they weren't quite met. That said, that is an iconic film. There's so many scenes in that movie that are now legendary. A lot of the script also has some great lines in it. I didn't really appreciate it as much at the time. I appreciate it more now. But I'm not a huge Star Wars fan, so that's probably something to look into for me as well. And if I were going to watch the series again, I would start with the first three films again, because I would need to refresh at that point. Um, Now, when it comes to anything before, let's say some of my earliest sci-fi memories, such as Silent Running, which I think is a great film. Watching old episodes of Outer Limits and The Twilight Zone are pretty, fantastic and really well done. Some of it requires your imagination, I suppose, because You know, a lot of science fiction films that were produced in the 50s and 60s were low budget affairs. And to watch them and appreciate them, it did require some imagination. Um,
I gotta add here that when I see some of the old films and you can see the string that's pulling the UFO,
the
I love
hubcap.
that. I absolutely love that. It doesn't hurt the movie. To me, it's going, oh my God, how wonderful. Things like that that you can actually see before they had very sophisticated special effects. So you could see the wires, you can see the, I love things like that. It's humorous and it's just a whole other dimension dimension of sorts, you know?
They are, and those movies, like I said, were done on a shoestring budget. And they were lucky they could afford the string for the hubcap. You know, I mean, really.
Yeah,
And to turn those movies into something fantastic for audiences back then, I think is just fantastic. I think audiences now are so jaded. Um, you know,
you
we're
make a
we're
case
used
for
to
that.
seeing, thanks to AI, and even before that, just image manipulation. We're used to now not believing what we see, um, and and not believing what we read because you can't believe anything anymore, seemingly. Um, and I think that's, unless we can do something, that's going to be the death of science fiction. Um, because you're not going to be able to immerse yourself in anything because you're not going to trust it. If you can't trust what you're seeing, if you can't trust what you're comprehending and what you're researching, or what do you do?
Yeah, right, exactly right.
Yeah,
Well, I
what's there to
remember
believe
seeing,
in?
I remember seeing, I just want to share with you, I remember seeing one of the monsters, you know, it was all, made up, had the suit on. It looked very much like a monster, except when the monster turned around, it was kind of like a lizard, some kind of lizard thing. And when it turned around, guess what I happened to see?
A zipper?
The zipper in the back of the costume. I went, oh my God, how wonderful, how
It does
wonderful.
take you out of the fantasy.
Oh man, it just added to me, it added to it. It really did. It just brought a whole other dimension into this thing. Oh, brother.
But
Anyhow, I love
when we watch those movies on television or even at theater, chances are that the copy that you saw of it in the theater had so many negative scratches on it that you wouldn't have ever been able to see the zipper anyway. And if you saw it on television, the screens were small and
oh
resolution
yeah.
was so
Like
poor
they were like this big. I remember my first TV set,
with
it was a black
pixels
and
that were
white.
this big. So,
And some of them were circles too, like the real Tubi things way back when.
oh, the old TVs, yeah. Uh,
Yeah.
they're they're in just outside of Columbus, Ohio, in a town called Hilliard. There is an early television museum that is fascinating. I've only been there once. I
Where is
think it
it?
was
Where
about two
located?
years ago. It was just outside of Columbus, Ohio,
Oh,
in,
really? Okay.
in Hilliard, which is Columbus Metro. But the early television museum is interesting. They have television equipment from the 1920s on,
Wow.
and this stuff is now 100 years old. They have some of the earliest working color television sets from 1953, 1954, and they're working, which means that they've got programming, you know, uh, on the screens of those old TVs. And it's wonderful to see the old television equipment. A lot of it's British because initially Great Britain was ahead of everybody else in terms of television programming. The BBC started programming in 1936, which is ahead of everyone else. And it was state supported, obviously, because it's BBC. Uh, but so a lot of the equipment that they have at the early television museum in Hilliard is actually a British composition.
Gives you such a perspective when you see what was normal way back when.
Or fantastic. That stuff was fantastic back then. If for the early 1950s, which is now more than 70 years old, to have a color television set with color programming,
Yes, yes,
even if it was this big,
yes.
you know, to have something like that in your living room, horribly expensive too. Those things were like $1,200, which got you really close to a new car back then.
I
You could get it.
remember there was something, and we didn't have it, but I've heard of it, and it was this plastic sheet, and there were colored lines of some kind on it. And if you put it on your little black and white TV screen, it would give you some sense of color. Does that ring any bell?
There were a lot of ways to colorize your black and white television sets back in the 50s,
Yeah.
but only NBC initially, which had an agreement with RC, well, with part of RCA, really. And RCA was credited with the first color sets here in the USA.
It was also kind of a wheel effect with color that would give some sense of a color screen. Does it ring any bell to you?
Well, that was one of the competing color technologies, which was actually visually superior to the RCA system, but it was also more expensive and probably not as reliable.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure that's true. I
And,
remember
and the
when
cheaper always seems to win out.
I
So,
was a kid and someone on our street in the south end, the north end corner of Springfield, Massachusetts, and the kid said, he's got a color television set. Oh my God. This was like, what? A color? It's in color? I said, it's absolutely in color. And we're invited to go to his home on Saturday morning because I believe the show was called Super Circus. And it had a program in the Saturday morning for kids, and it was in color. And we couldn't wait. And when we saw that, we couldn't believe that it was actually a living, moving color screen. It was, I mean, it was the biggest news in the neighborhood. And I pity the parents because we were making a regular trip there every weekend. These kids, the neighborhood kids, to see Super Circus as in color. Wow, that was a big deal.
well, when I was, oh gosh, I would have been about 3 or 4 years old at the time. My parents went out and bought at the time, this really expensive color television set in 1969 because the moon landing,
Oh yeah.
Apollo 9, was taking place, and they wanted to have a color television set so that they could see it in color. And my dad, it was and is really handy. And at the time, people they would have a defunct hi-fi or
With it,
um,
like a combination, a combo.
yeah, and they would want to get rid of it because one of the tubes had blown. So he would replace a tube for about $1, and we would wind up with whatever it was that they had in their homes. So I had a television in my bedroom, like from the time I was about 5 years old, which was
Oh,
which rare back then. But since he could repair, things like that, we had a TV in essentially every room, for a while. Now they
it
weren't
kind
all
of
great, but
it gives you a real
but we
perspective.
but they did want a color one so that they could watch the moon landing. Uh,
Right. Well, of course, and the moon landing, as far as I remember, was pretty much black and white, if you recall, right?
well, you didn't get a whole lot of color out of it. That's
On the
very
moon,
true.
right, right. It didn't have some bright colors, that's for sure.
It was probably just a ruse. Of my parents to get a color TV that cost back then, as much as a decent used car. Televisions were horribly expensive, once upon a time.
I remember early on, many, many years ago, I don't know how I met this guy who was a technician for one of the big companies, and he said, Nick, something is coming up that is pretty amazing, having to do with TV sets. And I said, what, tell me, please, what is it? And he said, there's going to be a revolution in technology, and your screen, which is now if you're lucky, 21 inch was a
25.
big screen, remember? In your combination phonograph, AM, FM radio, and your television set, all in one unit that they were selling. But he said, what's coming up is a whole new way. I believe he used the word plasma. I hope I'm right on that, but he said it will be much, much bigger screen. I said, that kind of big? He said, yes. And it's going to be really crystal clear, and the colors are going to be phenomenal. And this was huge news before it really broke. I said, oh my God, that's incredible. He said, it's going to be so amazing. It's going to make your little TV set look like a toy compared to what we've got now. And look at, how big is your screen, Brian? May I ask you, how big is your TV screen? Do you know?
Well, the one that I'm staring at right now is a 65.
Okay, and that's pretty big. It's pretty big. A friend of mine has one that's, I think, 75, whatever it is.
Mhm.
And,
Yeah.
and of course, looking at the movies and looking at, I mean, oh my God, what a difference. It really is a major difference of the quality of the sound and the visual. It's so much better. And we're lucky to be living in a time when that's going on. I guess the next step would be 3D. I don't know, maybe. I know they've been experimenting with 3D televisions for a while
Mhm.
now, but I don't know if that will happen in our own homes. But that would certainly be the next step, I would believe. But
I'm not sure that it will ever look convincing in my lifetime, but I'm sure it'll come around.
at some point,
I think that the advances in sound really shouldn't be forgotten either. TV has always used FM waves in order to broadcast sound, so television sound was generally better than what you heard, out of your AM radio in the kitchen or your bedroom. Um, but you didn't get the theater sound like you can get now. In my home years ago, I turned the family room into sort of a theater, and I put in wall speakers and theater seating and such for it. And for me, the television monitor itself looks great, but the sound can really transform a film, especially science fiction films.
oh yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. And of course, the music, what a difference. Oh, Hercules, hi, I see you right there. How we doing? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I was muted. Everything's fine.
Okay, and how much more time do we have?
I believe we have 9 minutes.
9 minutes, okay, great, thank you for that. And we take a quick break here and say that Disclosure Network New York, which I co-founded and I'm the current director of, is we operate in Manhattan, although we have members of our paid members of our uh, network in Europe, in Hawaii, in Canada. And I'm really proud of every single member of our group. They are deep researchers in the whole idea of ET communication, of what is out there, including the drone amazing adventures we're going on right now, which I believe a lot of big news is coming very quickly about that and so forth. And if you want to find out more about the organization, no matter where you live, including the planets, if you happen to be on a planet, you can contact me and I can give you membership information. You can get me on my email address, which is NICKNYNY1, and it's the numeral 1 at gmail.com. Again, NICKNYNY1 at gmail.com. And we are also on the internet. Disclosure Network New York is on YouTube. Brian, I cannot thank you enough, sir. I so enjoyed this interview and getting your perspective on the most wonderful, iconic sci-fi movies there are, and also the technology, which is really a part of the story, and the drive-in movies and all that too. What a wonderful, the whole idea of all of that is just one of my favorite subjects. Thank you, sir, so much. And we're planning to produce in May of this year a 3-day conference, a disclosure conference. And I'm going to give you more about that because perhaps if you have some time, you could be part of the conference. I certainly would love that. So I'll give you more information as soon as I have it.
Okay.
But thank you very much. An amazing program. So this is Nick Curto for Disclosure Network New York. Thanking you all for joining us and tuning in, and be adventurous, try new things, and open up your mind to the possibilities that we are certainly not alone. We've never been alone, and the adventures coming up in your lifetime are going to be phenomenal. And so fasten your safety belts because this is going to be one heck of a ride. Thank you. Thank you, Hercules.
And thank you, Nick, and thank you, Brian, for a truly fascinating and outer space episode. And I will talk to you both soon. Have a wonderful weekend. And again, if I haven't said it to you personally yet, Happy New Year. May 2025 bring many great things to you and yours.
Much love to all, everywhere, everywhere. Much love.
Good night.